Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another Build Your Dream Network virtual water cooler. And not just any virtual water cooler. I am back again with my buddy Chris Graham from Toronto, founder, communication expert over at TellPeople.co. You can see it right there. See if I can get that camera thing right there.
You got it.
And how are you, Chris?
I am doing terrific. It's a great day here in Toronto where I live, and I'm so glad to be back here with you. Thanks so much for having me back at the water cooler. This is a treat.
This is a water cooler. We're here to chat, and I want to chat about, I want to chat communication, but I want to chat in particular in connection with a new kind of project gig you've got. You are, I'm gonna read it here so I don't get it wrong. Co-leading curation and coaching at TEDx Toronto. Okay, tell me about this. Tell me, first of all, about what your role is, and then we'll get into TEDx Toronto later. But tell me about this role. What are you doing?
Sure. Yeah. No, thanks so much for asking. TEDx Toronto, briefly, it's a speaker event. So we have 10 to 12 speakers. And the way it works in Toronto is that we have a team of about 10 curators and coaches. So people who both curate the speakers, go out and find who the speakers are around the city and convince them to participate. And then once we have our slate of speakers, we then coach them. There's a 14-week speaker coaching process where we support speakers in pulling their talk together and really shining on the stage, what is for many people the biggest stage of their life. And so my job co-leading the team is to support the 9 or 10 other coaches that we have, help them deliver the support that they want to the speakers and also through the curation process. So it's a big leadership role for me. I'm very excited to step into this. Because TellPeople is my own company, but it's mostly me. And so this is a real opportunity to work with 10 times as many people as I normally work with. You can perhaps appreciate this a little bit, Kelly.
Yeah, yes, I do. Yes, I do. I'm going to say Alan the stuffed penguin. He's upstairs, but usually he's sitting down here. That is my coworker. So, okay, I want to back up on this for a second. You're co-leading. So what is that role involved with in terms of co-leading? What is some of the stuff that you've been putting together? And I'm also particularly interested in knowing, do other TEDx's do this? Do they have this infrastructure that Toronto has put in place for their TEDx?
Oh, that's a great question. So let me tackle the second question first, the infrastructure. So every TEDx event is different. So just so people know, so the TED conference, the official TED conference, happens usually in California every year, and it's a big, sophisticated thing. And I think in 2009, I want to say, they created the TEDx series, which is essentially they loaded up their constitutional documents onto the internet, and anybody can download the framework and have a TEDx satellite event. So they're everywhere. I think currently there are 2,600 TEDx events organized around the world. It's a massively popular conference format. But what that means is that the level of sophistication or structure is different all the time. So TEDx Toronto this is the 13th year. The first year it happened, I think there was 6 people involved, maybe. Now the team is over 80 volunteers. And so I would put that, I mean, I can't speak for all the TEDx events. I think this is at the more sophisticated or organized end of the spectrum. But, there are TEDx events, even just in Toronto, there's often a TEDx University of Toronto at each of its campuses. So there's one in Scarborough, there's one downtown, and there's one in Mississauga, Scarborough, Mississauga being suburbs of Toronto. And these are different levels of organization depending on people sticking around, how many people are involved, things like this. So we're on the more sort of structured end of the spectrum, I would say. That's a great question.
Good Canadians like a nice structure around this. But so 13 years and you have this speaker support structure, which is amazing. What is the structure that you've got in place that you've been part of co-leading in terms of this coaching structure for these 9 other people who are out there looking for speakers, curating, and going to be working with them for 14 weeks?
Oh, that's a great question. So I guess maybe the analogy is to think of it like a snowflake. So a typical speaker coaching relationship is one coach supporting one speaker. And if you have 10 speakers, that would be just 10 one-to-one relationships. But the way we structure it so that would be like 10 sticks stacked up next to each other. At TEDx Toronto, it's a snowflake. So we have the co-leads in the middle, and then they radiate out to support each of the 10 coaches. And then those 10 coaches support a speaker each. So then, so you have spokes, but then each of the coaches also co-lead. So they're co-coach with each other. So there's a supportive ring. And then every 2 weeks, all of the coaches come together to talk about status updates, brain trust challenges, things like this. And so the co-leads support everybody supports each other, and then each of the speaker coaches supports an individual speaker. Yeah, I should have brought a picture, but anyway, just think
No, we got
snowflake versus pile of sticks is
Okay.
what we're going for. Yeah.
I love it. It's like taking the pile of sticks and making it into sort of a hub and spoke system, as opposed to just kind of Jenga sticks on the ground.
Yes. Lots of overlap, lots of mutual support.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And in that 14 weeks, the coaches are helping the speakers with their structure, keeping on the timeline, because it's, quite intense. And in terms of like how, I'm saying getting the content ready for the TED format. How long does each speaker have to speak at TEDx Toronto?
So typically it's about 12 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Although last year the event was entirely virtual and everybody had 8 minutes.
Woo.
Because attention is a little bit lower online,
Mhm.
of course. It's funny.
Except when we're at the water cooler and we're having such a good time, people pay attention.
It's true. Well, as soon as you have banter, it automatically amplifies or enhances the amount of attention you can hold with people. But yeah, so one of the reasons we have this like very elaborate coaching process, though, because like 14 weeks of about like an hour a week, that's a lot for a 15-minute talk. Even though, it's for a lot of people, 800 people in the audience, maybe a couple thousand online. That's a huge audience. One of the things, so when TEDx Toronto originally started, they only had 6 people. They didn't have a lot of resources to be supporting speakers. And so they curated speakers who are really good at talking, right? Established speakers on the circuit. So it's somebody like yourself, right? Who's like, that needs very little attention, can just do a really great job. And that's terrific. But one of the things that's happened over time is there's been a realization that in order to curate speakers who have no speaking experience, who have amazing ideas that we want to share, but have no support, there needs to be a support network beneath those or around those people in order to lift them up to succeed on the stage. So over time, I guess you can think about like the amount of support that goes into the coaching process is really designed to expand the potential universe of speakers. And, the whole point of TED is ideas worth spreading. And so if you're limited to the ideas held by people who are really good at speaking, those are awesome ideas, but you're going to run out of that in a couple of years. Yeah, that's really what's behind the structure there.
That is so cool. And I want to get back to TEDx Toronto and curating speakers, because I know you're in that process right now and all that kind of good stuff. But let's talk about what makes you're a communication expert. You yourself are an amazing presenter, workshop leader, facilitator, all of those great things. And we're not saying that because you're my friend and we're at the water cooler and, whatever. This is the truth. But what makes, like, when you're thinking about communication and thinking about it in the sense of a presentation, in your expert opinion, where do you start? Like, if someone was like, oh man, I got to do a presentation, like, I got this idea, like, where do you start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess what I would say is it's helpful to think about your presentation or your talk, let's say, something a bit closer to TEDx Toronto, is you got to answer 3 questions. Why do I care as the speaker? Why does the audience care? And what do I want the audience to do at the end of my talk? And so if you think about the first question, like, why do I care as a speaker? The audience needs to have some understanding of like what calls you to the stage, right? Why do you feel like you need to get up in front of all of these people and start to talk? And it can't just be because like you're just a curious person or because my boss made me or something like this.
Or I have a big ego.
Yeah. I mean, or, the thing that, what we often sort of try to discover with people when we're answering this question is like, what's the story? Like, how did you come to be here? What happened in your life that caused you to make the various decisions that led to this moment? Because lots of people in your life have a similar life experience and they made different choices. So what is it about you? And if it's ego, let's have a story about your ego. Like, let's get that out there because people can relate to this. The worst is when somebody obviously has a big ego and they try to say some other story about how they're very selfless or just like really focused. It's okay to have feelings and to like be a person. The best thing is to just like put that out there. Right.
Okay. So number one, why you,
Yeah.
why you want to share this story, why you want to be on this stage, why you want to deliver this, if okay, so that's the first one. Okay, second thing in terms of creating a great communication talk, like a TED Talk.
Yeah, and the second part is like, why does the audience care? And you know, one of the ways we try to think about it, and I should say, like, something that I'm very influenced by is a guy called Marshall Gans, who teaches community organizing at Harvard. He's a terrific, fantastic guy, very, very smart, and has written a lot about this. His structure is slightly different, not using similar words, but if you've read that, you'll sort of recognize these echoes. So that's where this is coming from. So why does the audience care? Really what you're trying to do here is, if you've introduced yourself to the audience and said, this is what I'm about, this is why I'm here, this is why I care about this, the next thing you want to do is help the audience realize that they share values with you, and so that they also care, right? How can they recognize themselves as people who care about this just like you, right? And sometimes that's because you can tell them stories that they can identify with, right? Sometimes that's because you have sort of evidence or statistics. You can talk about their specific communities, right? Depending on the nature of the talk, and they can start to see themselves like, oh, I live in a community like that. This matters to me, something like this. So the way to answer the second question is, how can the audience recognize themselves as people who care about this in the same way that you care about this as the speaker?
Cool.
That's what I would say. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And then the third thing is, what do they walk away with?
Yeah. Or like, what sort of action do you want them to take? Like, especially at TEDx Toronto, or I think any TED Talk is like this. It's really an act of leadership. Like, you as the speaker are leading, or, you know, offering yourself as a leader to these 800 or 1,000 or even, you know, 20, depending on the size of the event, people in the audience. You're asking them to follow your lead, take some sort of action based on what you have just said, or, you know, follow you in the work that you're doing. And so at the end of the talk, if you've done your job, people are feeling like pretty motivated. They feel like they share values with you. And again, this is like straight up Marshall Gans. You've created all this motivation in them. You need to now give them an opportunity to act on that motivation, right? So, you know, these are calls to action, and you want to make sure these are like specific and actionable, right? So I can actually see myself making a difference, acting on these values that we share in the moment. So it's sort of, that's in a way the easiest part to describe, but often I think the hardest for people to do well. If only because it's a lot of work to get to the end of the talk, right? To like do something that holds people's attention for 12 minutes, makes them laugh, motivates them, etc. And then all of a sudden at the end, it's like the most important part, and you've used up all of your rhetorical juice, just, you know, holding people's attention for that long. So we spend like a surprising amount of time on those very specific last few sentences.
Here's what you can go and do, or yes, here's where you can go out. Here's a tool that you can take and apply. Here's where you can take whatever action. Okay, that's.
I mean, like, to give an example, not to put words in your mouth, but like,
please do.
Well, as you know, I'm a huge fan of Build Your Dream Network. But so, you know, I've seen some of your stuff online. You talk to people about the importance of networking and how critical it is, and how it's not just sort of email blasts and senseless cocktail party attendance. And so now people are feeling like motivated and engaged and like, yes, Kelly sees me, I get it. So like, what can I do? You can't just mic drop before you let them like charge out of there with something. So like, it's this sort of stuff. And I know you're amazing at doing this.
So no. That's like, it's an awesome example. Well, you know what? We're going to make sure we have some calls to action as part of this virtual water cooler, so that, you know, people don't walk away and say, well, that's all great, but, you know, and you and I have already done this. Look, first off, here's a call to action for everybody. Look, you can find out more about TEDx Toronto. Let's just run that for a while. I sort of feel, you know, you worked in New York. We can sort of have that the stock exchange ticker along the bottom. Okay, so you're in the process. What's the process for curating speakers? Now that you've moved from like the 6 people to, all right, we don't need to hear from those 6 again every year for 13 years, or, you know, hear from them twice because we can have 12 speakers now or whatever. Like, okay, let's talk about what the theme is for the TEDx Toronto. Let's talk about how you go and, all right, now how do you start hunting for speakers where you think, God, this person would be really good, but they're hesitant to get on board because they've never done this before. How do you go about curating the speakers, and what's the theme for the TEDx Toronto this year or next year?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the event next year will be May 2022, and there is no theme yet. Surprisingly, yeah, it's funny. Almost everybody asks this when we reach out about curation, and I actually need to find out why we don't work it out until later in the process. I think it turns out to be way less critical to choosing the talks, and it's also possible to, no matter what the talks are, it's very easy to connect them to a particular theme. Yeah, so it ends up being way less critical. So the theme at this moment is like the TED theme. What are ideas worth spreading? And a good example of this is like, what is currently on the 10th page of the newspaper, but in a couple of years it will be on the first page of the newspaper.
Or what's on the 10th page, which should be on the first page.
Yeah, and like there's a great TED talk, there's a great interview with Chris Anderson, the head of TED, with Ezra Klein at Vox. And one of the things that one of the examples that Chris Anderson gives is in the 1970s, cell phones emerged, and nobody was really talking about them because they were big and clunky and just for rich people. But like that is something that has dramatically changed the lives of most of a huge number of people on the planet, and we needed to be talking about that way more in the 70s than we were. So one of the questions I like to put to people when I'm curating is like, you know, what is the idea that you're working on that is like cell phones in the 70s, or like the internet in the 90s, Wi-Fi in the 2000s, like all of these things that we take for granted now, but even 5 or 10 years ago was on nobody's radar. Like nobody was thinking about this. So that as a prompt, that's what we use in lieu of a theme, I suppose. And then the mechanics of curation are really just like a masterclass in build your dream network, in networking, essentially. Like, so we have 10 curators who are scouring the city, talking to all of the people in their circle who are doing interesting things or who are sort of plugged into interesting networks. And sometimes that's formal things like book editors or newspaper editors. And other times it's just like that lady you always want to sit next to at the dinner party because she's always knows interesting stuff. Like, call her up. What is she interested in? And that's a good way to kind of go pull on that thread. Also, I mean, you'll love this. We all get, you can just email people and say, I work at TEDx Toronto and we'd love to talk to people at your organization about interesting ideas. And almost everybody will respond. Because,
Because it's TED. Like, it's TED.
Yeah, and fair enough. Like, so, you know, I just sit around and think of what are the cool institutions in Toronto that I'd like to talk to. I'm talking next week to the people who make the Canadarm, like the space station robot arm. Yeah. Why not? Let's see what they're up to. Maybe something cool. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, Canadarm, you did the arm. What's next?
Yeah, I'm literally going to ask them that, which I hope. Yeah, so we'll see. Maybe. So that's a big part of it. It's just sort of a classic networking, talking to people, asking questions. So that's a big part of it. And that produces sort of a short list of, let's say, 80 people, maybe closer to 60 people. Each of us can pitch sort of 5 speakers.
Oh, so this is almost like a VC model. You guys are out there hunting for potential like speakers, and you're like scouting, right? And then you're bringing it all to the table, and out of the people you've scouted, you've got to like make the case for like a couple of them, and then like does everyone like then just vote and sort of say, all right, here's the speakers we're investing in, and these are the ones who are going to be part of TEDx Toronto.
Oh, yeah, that's a perfect. I never thought of that, but yes, that is exactly how it goes.
Kelly for the win. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting because now it makes me feel like I think the model that we analogize to is like a newspaper where editors pitch stories, and which is fine. But because now there's all kinds of research about like the structure of a VC process and decision-making process, and not to get too inside baseball on it, but we're thinking really hard right now about what our voting mechanism should be amongst the curators. I bet after this, you can just email me all the relevant research from your personal life.
But you know, like I always think about it, like venture capital firms. It's not like these managing partners of these firms, you know, have the chance to make all the decisions. Instead, they have people who are out there, scouts, who come back and say, here's a potential, here's a founder you should be interested in, here's something. But to be able to say, right, you guys are out there hunting around, seeing what you can scour up, and then you're making a decision based on everything you've talked about to say, you know what, these are the ones my gut are telling me are the ones we should run with. And these are the ones I'm going to, bet my reputation on in the meeting, and I'm going to put forward and say, here's my top choices.
Yeah. So can I ask you then, like, can you say a bit more about your experience with this process? Like,
well, it's always one of these things I think about. I look at it this way, that often enough in the venture world, like, people are so busy worrying about pitching the top person. So, hey, I want to speak at a TED. Let me pitch, Chris Anderson, right?
Yeah.
Or the equivalent of, the top person at, TEDx Toronto. Rather than saying, you can't scale a model if you're having to pitch all the ideas to one person, the one person at the top, right?
Right.
And then a VC firm, they can't make, that top partner can't make all the decisions, run the firm, manage their investments, mentor the founders they already have, plus have a deal flow if they're doing everything. So how can you delegate? How do you outsource? And so that's where you outsource to, analysts. That's where you outsource to associates. That's where you outsource to scouts. And then they have weekly meetings where people bring forth the ideas, right? And which ones, right? And you're trusting people through this waterfall to filter and make decisions. Maybe someone's got a great idea, thinking like a great investment. Maybe they got to write, but you don't think it's going to make it in the timeline. Like, thinking about like a VC firm, they're not going to be ready or hit the metrics in the timeline that we would want to invest, right? So you think, you know what, I'm going to keep an eye on them. So maybe it's not for this next investment or this next TEDx. Maybe it's for our TEDx after that, but I want to keep an eye on this person. It's something interesting, but I can't get them ready in 14 weeks. This is, they've got too much going on, or what have you. So, but it's not like you, Chris, having to come to the table and say, all right, I've met with 60 people, and here's what each of them said. And based on this, I'm sort of thinking maybe these ones I'll talk to. Instead, you're coming and you're saying, after all the discussions I've had, here are my top 5.
Yeah.
Right. And here's the ones. And in the meantime, you've talked to all these other 60 people, and the TEDx Toronto organization is trusting your judgment as someone who knows communication and knows the quality of the project to put on the stage. But you've also built this pipeline of people who are like, wow, I never thought about, being on the TED stage, or the VC equivalent. Yeah. I'd never thought about getting VC backing, but these guys have come to me, and this is kind of interesting. Maybe I should look at them, right? So now you planted the seed for the future, but you yourself are doing this sort of curation and this thin slice, and then relying on, you having to present the case of why these. And I could see as an example, if everyone around the table looked at all your curators and said, yeah, can you try again? We need some more, we need some new ideas.
This happens sometimes. Yeah. It's can you say, I really want to hear more about this. So what happens? So this is a perfect description of the process. There's also, I should say, there is also a community nomination process. So in addition to us curating, there's a public nomination process.
Awesome.
It's going to be on the website in mid-September. So at TEDxToronto.com.
Let's put that ticker back up
again. Beautiful.
There we go. Okay, so the Toronto community, or people who are maybe ex-Torontonians but know people in Toronto, this is where you can. They're down there. They're down, right down. Yeah. You and I with this mirroring with the camera. This is okay. So the community can nominate, and then is there one of the coaches, the curators, who sort of filters through the community nominations and pursues them?
Oh, that's a great question. We all do, because we get about 1,000. So we divide it up. Yeah. No, it's good. We read every single one, and every year it generates a couple of ideas that we would never have found it if not for this process.
Wow.
It's it's a lot of work to incorporate it, but it is 100% worth it. And
I'm going to interrupt you, and that's also very VC, because VCs always have, I want to say, people who, kind of inbound, no connection, send in their pitch deck. And most VC firms have exactly this. They got thousands of these, hey, here's my deck, I'm raising my seed round or whatever else. And they have someone who goes through, they go through them, just in case, the next, fill in the blank, the next unicorn, the next, billion-dollar company is sitting in there. But it's probably, like TEDx Toronto, there's, out of 1,000, maybe there's, 1, 2, three that you're like, okay, this is great. So yeah, that's very VC. Oh, I'm liking this analogy we've come up with.
Yeah, and so, then my next question is, what's the next step? So once we got the lowly analysts like me putting together the short list, and then it gets into, then the VCs, they decide to invest. So like, what's the metric there? You said before, like, it's my gut, and that's fair, but is that it, or is there a more like?
Oh no! I mean, they all have their investment thesis and all that, and I don't have the. I mean, I'm sure each firm is sort of different in terms of what their voting structure is, but that's where you could say, right, is like who actually has a vote, and if there's, if it's between two speakers and you have one space left, how do you break the tie?
Yeah.
Because my guess is, now not having been involved with your speaker selection, my guess is that it becomes pretty clear as a group, when you care about the overall, once you sort of take your ego out of your selection, once you see that everyone else has, you can start to sort of feel like what would be, and I guess it's almost like, trading cards, there's the one that you're really going to fight for because, you've got like maybe one out of all your suggestions, and, which are the others you're going to, let slide because you see something else that you think, yeah, that one and that one is stronger than these two that I've got. So, those ones are side, but I'm still going to fight for this one.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description of part of the process. And there's also, what ends up happening is we have more than 12. So it gets really, you're right that things start to emerge, but what emerges is not 12, it's like 30.
Right.
And like, unsurprisingly, there are more than 12 amazing ideas in Toronto.
Right.
Like, of course. And so, yeah, and then it becomes a real challenge but also like, it's a really supportive team. Like, everybody is really generous and caring and supportive. And so the discussions are like challenging, but not like difficult.
Right.
Like, it's a good discussion, and then it's very iterative. It takes a long time, and everybody comes out feeling good about it. And it just takes a long time.
Yeah, well, I think because my guess is you pick people who curate and who want to coach, and they want the best. At some point, you got your ego involved in this, and at some point, you kind of check it at the door because you're like, right, my ego is in having the best TEDx Toronto, not the best TEDx Toronto with everybody I selected to speak.
Yeah, 100%. And like, it's funny. We like to think that we check the egos at the beginning of the process, but it's good to be self-aware. You're quite right. Like, you want your people. You've curated people for a reason, and it would be bad actually if people were like, yeah, whatever. I don't care if my 5 move forward. Like, we want people. Then you pick the wrong 5 if you don't care strongly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, this is like so cool. In the time we have left, share with us where people can find out more about you and the work you do, and because you're not just out there talking to the folks at Canadarm and curating speakers. You got your company and your day job too. So where can people find you? What kind of projects are you personally working on or looking to work on right now?
Oh, thanks. Well, the easiest place to find me is at my website. So that's tellpeople.ca, and that's at the bottom there. And it's interesting. We're going through a rebrand right now. So if you go today, as soon as this is up later today, you can probably see the old website, and then several days or maybe a month after, come back and you can see the new website. So you can see before, after. It's a huge milestone I've been doing this for like 5 years. So it's a huge milestone for the first like professional rebrand. Like, actual professional people are paying attention to my color scheme. Is a weird thing to say if you're starting your own business. Like, I never thought I'd get this far. So that's, internally we're doing that. I'm very excited to roll out, what's a good way to describe public speaking coaching and speaker coaching But it's like a class. So what I'm doing is, instead of just writing it for people, I'm doing these 10-week programs, like a one-to-one intensive, where basically I'll be your teacher, like a professor. And so there are readings based around relevant skills or tools that can help you become a more creative version of yourself. A lot of the people that I work with are good at making the case. Like, people know how to make presentations, they know how to stitch it together and get their point across, but they also want to know how to be like a bit more special, I suppose. I get a lot of questions after presentations. Maybe you get this too. People are like, how can I be more like you? And they don't mean like a copy. They just mean like, how can I be like creative in the way that you're talking about the ideas? And so I've been spending like most of this year thinking about what actually are the tools, right? Ooh. We all started with the same, I went to business school. I learned the same, intro, roadmap, 3 points. Like, we all know how to do that basic stuff. So how is it that I come up with my version or you come up with your version, and most people are still doing the like intro, roadmap, conclusion, which is like effective. Like, that's nutritious. It gets the point across, but it's not special. It's not memorable. And so I built this course, this like tutorial program. It's like 10 weeks, an hour a week with me. And we just dig into it. Readings that I think are interesting, questions that I think are interesting, drills that I think are interesting. It's a lot of stuff from where my comedy school practice that comes into it, like joke writing, things like this.
It's feeling to me like when you go to do like a master's or a PhD and you got to write a thesis, and you have a like, I want to say like online coaching or an online course that is more like that. And besides the fact that you're delivering that content, I love the idea of this format of like a different way to do this versus the usual, hey, take my online course.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much. To be honest, like, I feel like I take a lot of inspiration from you. Like, as I've said many times, like, I really admire what you're doing, and it's really creative and it's different. There are a lot of networking books out there, but yours is the only one that I've read several times and give away to people.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And so, trying to think about like what's different there. And it's not a model. I think it's like ways of thinking. And if you give those ways of thinking to other people, they won't be like mini Kelly Hoeys or mini Chris Grahams. They'll be a more creative version of themselves. And like, I'm super excited to see more of that creativity in the world.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. Oh, I can't, I'm going to have to find out more. You and I will talk about that. Let's do the ticker one more time for people to, okay, when's the application? When is the application for so you are out there busy, like curating. If you see Chris's email, folks in Toronto, or Chris's number come up on your phone, there's a reason you should be answering it. He's not like, peddling crap. He's got good stuff to talk to you about. But if the community wants to nominate someone, when does that application open?
Good question. I believe it is in the 3rd week of September.
Okay, so they should get on the TEDx Toronto. You got a mailing list or something, they should be checking on the TEDx Toronto site regularly and all of that.
Jump on the email list, or just follow any of we're on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. And if you are touching any of those social accounts, you will not miss it. It will be impossible. It will be annoying when it comes out. So any of those channels, you will for sure catch the nomination.
Oh, that is awesome. This has been, I want to say, so much fun. Thank you. Thank you for coming back to the water cooler. And, you know me, I'll always tap you to come back and have more of these conversations because it's such a good time. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled to be here. It's great to see you. Thanks so much.
Okay. See you soon.